We all know the story of D-Day, right? The biggest invasion in history. But what we're going to talk about today is something deeper. It's not just what happened, but why it was such a complete and total shock to the German high command. This is a story about how believing your own propaganda can lead to a miscalculation so massive it costs you everything.
Just try to imagine it for a second. You're a German officer on the coast of Normandy. For years, you've been told that America is decadent, weak, and racially impure, a nation that could never fight. Then, the sun comes up, and what you see on the horizon doesn't just challenge your orders, it shatters your entire universe.
Because this is what they saw. It wasn't just an invasion. It was an entire floating country. The sky wasn't blue. It was literally black with planes, blotting out the sun. This wasn't the America they read about in their propaganda pamphlets. This was a level of industrial power that to them seemed completely and utterly impossible.
So, let's start right there, with that moment of impact. That brutal, jaw-dropping realization from the guys on the ground that the world they thought they knew was already gone.
Now this quote is so important because of who's saying it. This isn't some low-level report. This is Field Marshal von Rundstedt, the top German commander in the West, reporting back just a couple of weeks after D-Day. And he's being brutally honest. He's saying the #1 reason they're losing is because the Allies own the sky. It's so total that just moving a tank in the daytime is basically a death sentence.
So that brings us to the real core of the issue. How could a military machine as famously meticulous as Germany's get it so catastrophically wrong? Well, the answer isn't just a simple intelligence failure. It goes way deeper, right into the DNA of their whole ideology.
And there you have it, straight from the source. This wasn't just some line Hitler used in a speech for effect. This was a private conversation, what he genuinely believed. He was utterly convinced that America's diversity, which he described in these just vile terms, made it fundamentally broken and incapable of ever acting as one.
And this wasn't just Hitler's idea. It was the official story for the entire regime. You had Goebbels pumping out propaganda about it. You had Hermann Goering joking that Americans could only make refrigerators and razor blades. They'd completely convinced themselves that America was too soft, too diverse, and too obsessed with money to ever be a real threat.
All right, so that was the fantasy they were living in. Now let's pivot and look at the terrifying, unbelievable reality that was quietly building up on the other side of the Atlantic. A reality that was about to hit them like a tidal wave.
I mean, that's really the question, isn't it? It's one thing to be biased, but it's another thing entirely to ignore a mountain of hard evidence. The numbers tell a story that German intelligence actually knew, but the leadership simply refused to believe. Okay, just look at this chart. This is absolutely staggering. In one single year, 1943, the United States produced more tanks than Nazi Germany built during the entire 6 years of the war. Let that sink in. Sure, the Germans had their high-tech Tiger tanks, but for every one of those, America was churning out dozens of Sherman tanks. Quantity has a quality all its own.
And in the air, the story was even crazier. Almost 85,000 planes in 1943 alone. There was a Ford factory at a place called Willow Run. Get this, they were rolling a brand new 4-engine B-24 bomber off the assembly line every 63 minutes. That's the air power von Rundstedt was talking about. You just can't fight that.
So how did all that gear get to Europe? On the famous Liberty ships. Using assembly line techniques, they cut the time to build a huge cargo ship from over 200 days down to just 42. By 1943, they were launching 3 of these ships every single day. They were literally building ships faster than German U-boats could sink them. It was a race Germany was destined to lose.
But you know, it wasn't just about the numbers and the machines. Let's talk about the people, because this is where the Nazi ideology truly, spectacularly collapsed. The very diversity that Hitler saw as a fatal flaw, it turned out to be one of America's greatest strengths.
Just think about this. The Tuskegee Airmen, a group that racist ideology said shouldn't even be able to fly, became so good that bomber crews specifically requested them as escorts. The 442nd, made up of Japanese Americans whose families were locked up in internment camps, became the most decorated unit of its size in U.S. history. The Navajo language, from a people considered primitive, became a code the enemy could never break. Time after time, the reality on the ground made a complete mockery of Nazi racial theories.
And the irony here is just off the charts. The Nazis thought a woman's place was in the home. Meanwhile, millions of American women, the Rosie the Riveters, became the engine of war production. And maybe most incredible of all,
Hitler's hatred of Jewish people drove the most brilliant scientific minds on the planet right into America's hands, where they would lead the Manhattan Project and build the atomic bomb. He literally gifted his greatest enemy its ultimate weapon.
So now, let's go back to the front lines in Normandy. This is that moment of collision. It's where years of self-delusion smash head-on into the undeniable, brutal reality of steel and fire.
You know, not every German leader was blind. Erwin Rommel, the famous desert fox, he saw this coming. He wrote this before the invasion. He had fought the Allies in North Africa, and he knew what their air power could do. He understood that all the tactical genius in the world means nothing if you can't move. His warning was a prophecy, and it was completely ignored.
This chart, right here, this is Rommel's nightmare made real. On D-Day itself, for every single flight a German plane made, an Allied plane made 37. The German Air Force was so outnumbered it might as well have not existed. In fact, one of their most famous aces flew a single attack run over the beaches with his wingman, and that was pretty much it. 2 planes against almost 15,000. The sky belonged to the Allies.
And here it is, the breaking point. Just 3 weeks after D-Day, this is what the commander-in-chief screams down the phone line to Hitler's headquarters. The fantasy is over. The man on the ground sees the truth. The war is lost. He is begging the ideologues safe in their bunkers to wake up. And for his honesty, he was fired, of course.
So when you put it side by side, the contrast is just absolute. Every single core belief the Nazis held about America wasn't just wrong, it was the complete opposite of the truth. America's diversity was a source of strength, its industry was an unstoppable giant, its democracy proved incredibly resilient, and its soldiers fought with unbelievable bravery.
What we've been looking at here has a name. It's called ideological blindness. It's what happens when you believe your own story so completely that you can no longer see the world as it actually is. For Nazi Germany, this wasn't just a moral failure, it was strategic suicide. And at the end of the day, that's what D-Day really was. It was more than just a military victory. It was the place where a hateful, arrogant ideology was physically pulverized by the reality it had denied for so long. The truth had finally arrived, and it came on thousands of ships. So when you zoom out, you can see this incredibly fast, 3-year collision course. It starts with Hitler's arrogant dismissal of America, and it ends with his top generals staring at a force so massive that their only sane advice was to surrender. It's just a stark reminder of how quickly and how brutally reality can punish bad ideas. And that really leaves us with a question that's just as relevant today as it was then. This whole story is a powerful warning. It forces us to ask ourselves, what important truths might we be ignoring right now, just because they don't fit the stories we like to tell ourselves? At what point does our conviction stop being a strength and start making us blind?